This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Happy New Year, everyone. This is the first podcast of Black Market Leadership for 2021, and I'm sure it's going to be a very exciting year. Hopefully not as exciting as 2020, but we will see. Today, we have a good friend of mine, and you probably already know her because she's already been on the podcast. That's Jodi McCall. Say hello, Jodi.
Hi, everyone.
So Jodi and I were talking that we have a subject today, which it really overlaps the things we talk about in Black Market Leadership, the fog of war. And Jodi has a really, really interesting story that we're going to talk about today and dive into it. The fact is she got laid off from 2 decades at a big Fortune 500 company, 2 decades. And how does she deal with it? Well, it really goes to the fog of war. In fact, she and I had many conversations where she told like, I'm in the goddamn fog of war. So before we jump into this, let me, for the audience out there, because I know I have not brought this up, let me tell you what the fog of war is, what it means. The fog of war is a term that came up a long time ago, back in probably the 1800s under Karl von Clausewitz. He was the West's most famous philosopher of war. And what it was is he was describing Napoleon. And if you remember those days, you've probably seen on television, remember how the troops would line up shoulder to shoulder and they go in the battle and they start firing their muskets and the cannon would roar. All that smoke would cloud their vision. And the fact is, they couldn't see what's in front of them. All they knew was their enemy had been in front of them seconds prior. What do you do? And in a sense, the fog of war, in a larger sense, is a gap between plans and reality. I want to do X, but I don't know all the things around me. And I would tell you 2020 has been a great example of the fog of war. Everyone plans their businesses to go X, and the economy happens, COVID happens, which affects the economy, which affects unemployment, and it affects all our lives, and we're not planning for it. So the question is, how do we deal with the fog of war? It happens every day. It's natural. And one thing we're going to learn today, especially with Jodi, because she has a great behavioral profile, we're going to learn about how the fog of war affected her. So saying that, Jodi, what was the major event? Well, I've already mentioned it. Give us some background to this event and how it happened and what happened to you once you got word.
So I was a manager at this big company. I'd been there for 18 years. You know, you're pretty rooted in the day to day. You feel very valued. You feel like you're a member that is needed to be there to keep the business going, an essential element. Well, COVID happened, you have working remotely, you have a lot of things that I think are affecting business decisions, and you have to make hard choices, to keep the business going or whatever it is, as a manager, they're really not running their decisions by you. So it happened one day that I got a phone call that was like, your position has been eliminated as of 5:00 yesterday, by the way. So it wasn't really executed well. But it's shocking because you really have invested a lot. You feel very loyal, and all of a sudden the control and the decision is taken away from you, and it's happening to you.
Yeah, professionally speaking, you're on cruise control. You are a manager, basically going to be a senior manager, and you had so many contacts. You had been there forever. Everyone knew you. You were the go-to person. And I remember the phone call in August. They let me go yesterday.
Yeah,
as you've been working home the whole time, and Now this is something that we have to give kudos to Jodi for, because Jodi, though being at this company, her and I had been working, for months, preparing possibly to jump ship and go somewhere else. So we actually had the wheels turning. We had our resume, our leader profile. We had done all the homework. And it just so happened that you got word right in the middle. In fact, I think you even had your first or second interview scheduled by the time you got word. So it wasn't
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I think I had gone on, I think I'd gone on at least one, which quite frankly, having all that in motion really made the blow easier. I think it would have been crushing, absolutely crushing if it had happened and I wasn't already looking for other opportunities. That made it much easier to digest, at least initially.
So let's dive into this for a second because this is really important. One way, the fog of war is one thing, but if you really want to know, when that fog surrounds you, when it starts to rise up and cloud your vision, you got to know if you're going the right way. And this is a big thing. What is the right way? What is the right way for you, the person listening? And that's something that Jodi and I had been discussing for months. Was the fact was, even though she had been a part of this company for 2 decades, you just weren't happy there. The fact is, you're a very people-oriented person who can drive a mission, but you're big picture. And the other company, that your previous employer, had been very task-oriented, very, if that's a fair way to say it, very conformist. That the 99%. 99% is failure. It's got to be 100%. And that really wasn't you. So you really weren't happy. So the fact is, I think when you said the blow was lessened, when you got the word, that's one thing. But then I remember a couple of days later talking to you, it sunk in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll let you go over my behavioral profile, because you have a way with words. But for me, trust and being valued and loyalty are huge pieces of who I am. So, the initial blow and the initial news was like, okay, I was looking to go anyway. It's no big deal. But then when it sinks in that you're not needed and the next day just happens without you and it doesn't really matter, it really starts to hit home, and it is emotional and it is hard to deal with the thought that you might not matter. And I think that I mean, no business operates, with one sole individual leaves or is let go and the place is going to shut down. But that's not how you want to feel like you are part of the organization. So when you are part of an event like this and that happens and it just keeps trucking along, it is very demoralizing and it hurts. It hurts to feel like you didn't matter.
Yeah. That's a great point. You mentioned earlier about the behavioral profile. So Jodi and I are very similar in certain ways. Jodi is what we call basically, she is a high extrovert, low conformist. And that, which means she is very, very people oriented, and she's very innovative. She can be very individualistic. You can count on her, give her a mission. You can count on her to take it on, even take a team with it, make sure it's done. But what's interesting about her profile is, even though she's a high extrovert, she has a high dominance right below it. So she is big picture. She's not into all the small tasks, and she's also very fast paced, very quick. Now, saying that, Jodi is very people oriented. Now, I'm a high dominant and a low patience, meaning I have no patience at all, and I like big picture. I'm also highly extroverted, but to me, the mission's first. For Jodi, it's people first. And I remember one of our conversations was, I think, a week after, you had the word, and we were still going for these other companies. You're really putting out the resumes. You really started taking it personal. You're like, my God, the trust, it wasn't there. And you remember, I would tell you, I'm like, drive on. Like, stop it, drive on. And then one day you call up and say, you were a real asshole to me. I'm like, what? I was. And that was a real great epiphany for both of us, in the sense that your different behaviors see the fog of war differently. To me, it's a natural hiccup. You got to drive on. Who cares? Move. And you're like, I was betrayed.
I remember that day. That was I had interviews lined up with another company when this happened. So it was like, no big deal. I'll get hired there. And that one didn't end up working out. So it was now a second blow of someplace that doesn't want you. And I was talking it through with you and trying to rationalize it. And what do we do next? And you're like, whatever, it's in the past. Just move on to the next thing. And it's like, I think when I don't know if it's everybody or just me, but when you're people oriented and this is the reaction that you're getting from people, there's a lot of grief that goes with it. You do take it personally. It's like, what did they not like? What did they not want? So every time you hear no, because now you're in this process of throwing yourself out there and putting out your resume, doing interviews, with every no, it feels like a rejection, from the people element of me, from the mission element of me, it feels like failure. There's no wins. So it is just hit after hit is what you're feeling during the whole experience.
Yeah, because you're so people oriented, and that you really are about the people, about being recognized, about being a part of the team. And I remember the first, and we got very, very lucky because we put together a really high speed profile, not profile, but a resume. It looked great, plus your leader profile. And the first, we identified, I think, 5 companies. The first one of your pick actually interviewed you, and you got so close, and at the end they said no. And I remember talking to you.
Went like 5 steps. I had like 5 different meetings with them. It was crazy.
Yes. Yeah. And you had such great feedback. But at the end, they said no. And you and I were talking, and you're like, my God, why don't they want me? What did I do? And I said to you, this is the fog of war. You have no clue to what's happening in the back end. You have no clue. The infighting, you don't know if the gentleman who was interviewing you had his cousin over there who is waiting in line to take this position. You have absolutely no clue. You cannot take it personally, and you got to keep moving forward. So again, that's another example of the fog of war, how it affects people differently. And that's fine. You just got to realize, I think I was correct. You got to drive on. But of course,
I think someone like me that has this, profile and personality and behaviors of being about people and does take people's reactions very personally. I think going through something like this, or any type of life experience where you've kind of lost control and you are now relying on people's opinions on your next win or success, I think it is very important to have a support system around you. Family and friends, obviously, they're going to be your cheerleader, your number one. It's like, screw that other company, they say all the right things. But I think it's also important to get some professional support. And I think that's what you offered, with helping with the resume, the leader profile, the push forward. Like, we're not, you were not, and we talked about this, allowing me to go to that place. So even, it took a lot for me to even tell you what I thought, that you were being a jerk. But we talked about it afterwards, and, the similarities of our profile and, our friendship, and that you were just not going to allow me to go down in the dumps to take it personally. It's like, shake it off and keep moving. That's what you were doing, which I truly think that's what somebody of my behavioral profile needs, because it's very easy to like, well, I'm just going to go rot away in bed and watch Netflix and not really, not put yourself out there,
Yeah. So no, because when we had the conversation, I was so apologetic, because sometimes I feel like a serial killer. I'm like, emotions. I've heard of these things. Let me go look them up in a dictionary. So now that was one lesson, the fog of war, not knowing what's in the back end. But you have another lesson that so the good news for the audience is Jodi now has a new position. Very happy with it. Really cool company, much smaller than than what she previously came from. But they're on the attack. They're moving forward. So very excited for her. But previous to this, though, she had an interview, which is another trap of the fog of war. Oh boy. This company that she was talking to, was it 5 interviews total that you went to, or was it 4?
This one might have been 4, but once you get in this process, which I didn't realize either, because obviously the last time I interviewed was 20 years ago for an entry-level position. So it is also very shocking to now have to jump back into this process, but going for these higher positions, and I was interviewing for anywhere from manager, senior manager, or director positions. So that's what I was looking for. Those are not a one and done. The I actually looked it up, so you can go Google this too. It says to expect anywhere from 3 to 5 interviews, and one of them will consist of being interviewed by a panel of people. So that is completely different environment than just talking one-on-one. Your field These interviews I went to, I was in rooms or on Zoom calls with anywhere from 3 to 6 people that they were all attention on me and taking turns asking questions. So I think that's something important for the audience to realize too. Depending on what position you're going for, depends really the road to be prepared to travel, that you could get through all these steps and then get a no after you've invested all this time or energy, when you're thinking it's a sure thing with each step that you keep go to. But I think, as I personally learned, that is not the case.
Let me back up for a second. So two things. One is let's stay with this. You went on this one company, which was a fantastic company as well. I mean, it was really interesting. You met several people. Even supposedly the woman who was doing HR had a reputation for not liking people, but she loved you, and everyone was shocked. She even took you to lunch. So you went through these 3 interviews. You met, there's multiple executives. You met the team. They really, really liked you. And then the VP who is going to hire you, basically the hiring manager, really liked you. Very similar behaviors as you're describing them to me. But then look, I remember saying, "Don't worry, this is going to be easy. It's going to be easy." So you go
slam dunk. Everyone's like, slam dunk. You got it.
You're in the fog of war. You know you're on your trail. You know the enemy castle. You know it's in front of you. You felt it, right? You felt something hard. It's got to be it. You're about to get inside that gate. And then you go to that last meeting with the SVP and the VP. And then, you learn that this guy, apparently that particular branch had one view of themselves. The SVP had a very different view of them, and it shut you down. And for an SVP to step in and override his new VP and override really the entire branch, to me, that was almost a blessing, because there were some real issues there. So I'm very happy you didn't get that. But I think the lesson was we become very confident, almost overconfident at that point. And like I told you before, as an entrepreneur, it's never over until the check is in the bank, not in your hand. It's in the bank deposited.
Seriously. So, yeah, I totally agree with that experience, that, really hit it off with the team that was present at the site. And talking to them, it was like my personality and my credentials were filling what they were looking for. And then you have the senior VP that doesn't even work there, works across the company, and comes in. And even when I left there and I called you, I was like, I don't think it went well. I didn't get a good vibe. It just didn't seem as good as other conversations. And lo and behold, before the day was out, like, the no came through in an email. So yeah, you just never really know, and it's not over till it's over. And for the viewers here, I think being in a job for a long time and having certain experiences when you're first starting out of interviewing, and then trying to jump back in it 20 years down the line, and it's a different criteria because it's a different level job. I mean, you're meeting VPs, senior VPs, site directors, it's like a completely different ballgame. I mean, the last interview that I went on, that I actually got the job, I was interviewing with the CEO. It's like, this is, it makes you have to really kind of go with the flow and the punches, and you really don't know what you're walking into. Who's going to ask you what, especially when you have multiple people in the room. So it was very nerve-wracking, because you were trying to prepare, so I really think that working with you with we would kind of like war game the interview.
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, let's jump into this. So for the audience, we don't have to give all the secret sauce, but let's talk about some of the things that we did to really, really do this. So this is not just, what we did not do is just create a resume, submit it. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And that's it. No. We took this to another whole new level. So let's do this. What are the top 2 or 3 things you think really, really made a difference in terms of you engaging with your audience, really making sure that what they offered was within your skills, not just skill set, but that's what you wanted to do?
So I think the first thing, like, there's two parts. There's the part about you, and then there's the part about them. So the part about you, I think that you really got to learn what your strengths and development areas are, because you're really going into this that you got to try to sell you. So you got to figure out what that is first. And you might not know, especially if you've been in a company for 20 years. You haven't really had to sell yourself, So really, I mean, we were working on that before, but really diving deep into that, I think, was important. Then cleaning up the resume. Oh, sorry.
No,
Go
so
ahead.
let me jump in. So what does that mean? Every day, Jodi, you and I would talk. I would ask you, if not every day, every 2 days, who are you? And within one sentence, you had to encapsulate exactly you, the essence of you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly. Who are you? You are a
Do I
people.
have to say it?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have
You
to
say,
say
you
it
say it.
because this was like a brainwashing to make sure that, like, I had the sentence. A people leader who drives quality results. So we would practice those kinds of things over and over again, because it's about knowing yourself, your strengths, and then, like, what is your brand? What are you going to sell? And I mean, I'm chatty, you're chatty. Not everybody you're going to interview with is chatty. They don't want, like, a novel,
Yeah.
especially that senior VP. He was.
And for the audience, that's this little, I hate saying like an elevator pitch, but I guess
It is. It 100%
it's
is.
very minimal, but it's one sentence. And when Jodi says that she is a people leader who can rapidly drive results, that means something. She is a people leader. Now, there's some organizations who are more interested in the technical side. They see the people element as important, but that's not what they would ever lead with.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredibly important, because as you were interviewing some companies, at least even in their brochures, or at least in their descriptions, they would say, we are all about quality, we're all about technical excellence, and at the end, we're about people. That's a
Mm-hmm.
big sign that may not be the right place for you to go, despite the name or whatever.
Yeah. So I think also what we did for me, we did the resume with my past experiences, but there wasn't one version of that. Throughout this process from August, we both worked on it together, of tweaking it based on putting out the resume, applying to applications, and tweaking it for the right verbiage. So once we got the meat and potatoes there were several tweaks that we did, remember, and really honing in on what we wanted to communicate to the employer, to make it attractive.
Yeah, and a big thing about communicating to the employer was, we've always treated, anytime you're doing a resume, anytime you're doing a job interview, anytime you're doing an interview, you got to treat your life like a story. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 major chapters, really your major strengths, and everything you say needs to go back to those strengths. Everything. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't distract them. I think, to me, the sign of success is if you can walk away from the meeting and the people at the table can say on their fingers, "Oh, that was Jodi. She's good at driving people. She's comfortable change, fast food environments." That's what they remember. That's a success. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the big thing. So you're right. We would always tweak the language, but it always went back to those essentials. Those essentials might change in prioritization,
Mm-hmm.
but it always went back. So you were really,
Mm-hmm.
really nimble on your feet, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Then, as far as the them part, the employer part, I think the first step is when you're looking for potential positions, you're obviously starting with the title. You're looking for particular titles. I was looking for manager, senior manager, director, in a particular field. But then it was trying to, like, branch out from an industry that I wasn't in before. And then it dove into the job descriptions that they were putting there. And just like we took a lot of time to pick the right adjectives to put on the resume, I would go through them and underline the adjectives they were using. Like, some of the things that I would do was I was underlining how many times they talked about leading a team, coaching a team, organizing a team. How many times was that put in all the bullets that were there? Could it be cookie cutter? It might be, but that's at least a first indication that people are going to matter there and the job is going to be centered around people, which is one of my strengths. And I flourish in an environment with people. So really being by myself or not being part of a team was not what I was looking for.
Perfect. Let me ask you this, because I have heard many people say this, and I know you have some experience. When people tell you, during an interview, you just be authentic, just be yourself. What would your feedback on that be?
Well, we talked extensively about that too. So I think that you always have to be authentic because it comes across quite obviously if somebody's faking it, especially if the other person can read people very well. It's completely obvious. However, part of myself that's authentic is I can be verbose. I sometimes struggle to get right to the point. And that is really not what you want to do in an interview. Another thing that happens for me in particular is when I get comfortable, my language might not be as professional. I might be showing too many cards, so that's still being authentic, but that might not be what you want your first impression to be. So I think it's a fine line that you have to manage. So for me, I have to be very self-aware and very conscious of when I start getting comfortable. If the people are very nice, the one place that took me out to lunch, I had to be me, but I couldn't just like be me at my house with my friends.
Yeah. There's a certain limit to it. And exactly. So being authentic is one thing, but you got to know, I think this really goes to another element, because we've had talks about this too, where I've heard many people going in these conversations, and the conversations about being employed are all about them. I'm going to work here. I'm going to do this. What they're not doing, what you and I have talked about, is it's about the company. It's about, I'm not here to get employed. I'm here to bring value to you. This is what I can bring to you. This is what I can help make you a success. I think that kind of language, even though it's small, it makes a big, big difference.
Well,
What do
it
you
makes
think?
sense. It makes sense because ultimately the employer is the one forking out the dough. And
Exactly.
they're making the decision. They have all the control. So if you can't communicate via resume and in interviews what you are going to provide them because they're providing you with this money, you're not getting the job. So, I think behaviors are part of that. Personalities are part of that. How can you
Maturity.
maturity? How can you communicate what you've done in the past? With that senior VP, for instance, when he asked questions, they were very broad. They were very vague. I can speak in that kind of language, but it was very difficult for me to try to answer the question specifically and give specific examples because it was so vague.
So
So it was very hard to think quickly and come up with something specific with something so vague.
I think one thing that you and I talked about that is very helpful. It's not necessary, but it's very helpful, is having an understanding of behaviors. As you said
Mm-hmm.
earlier, you being a high extrovert, and I've always told you, high E's always have a TMI issue. If they get
Yes.
very comfortable around people, they feel that they're like, "Hey, we're buddies," and they'll say things later on like, "Oh my God, why did I say that?" But with
Mm-hmm.
that SVP, the one who ultimately turned you down, this is what we're talking about for the audience. The questions he was asking you were really of high conformity, meaning this is the
Mm-hmm.
person who is process oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I were talking, he was asking very specific questions. So even some of your answers were leading to people, very people
Mm-hmm.
oriented. But to the
Mm-hmm.
high C, he's interested in processes. So
Mm-hmm.
even though you may think you're saying the right thing, you got to know who your listener. It's like writing. You got to know who your reader is, because he didn't want to hear about people. He wanted to hear about technical excellence, every
Mm-hmm.
process. How do you measure processes?
Mm-hmm.
And if you deviated from that, then that was a red flag to him.
Exactly. And I think where my pitfall was in it, because when you have an experience like this, I think it is important to assess the experience to learn something from it before you go on to the next one. So with, my previous interview at that company being 4 hours long, including lunch, I don't really think I went in there with like my head necessarily in the game. Myself and everybody I talked to was like it was a slam dunk. So that was problem number one. Problem number two, I think it was very difficult to quickly compute all of this of what he was actually communicating to me and try to adjust to it. I
Was that
just don't
left
think
field?
I was prepared for that because everybody else at the company was so people oriented. So I don't think that really hit me until the next day when we were kind of after action going over what happened, that it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't want that if that's what was going on there. But in the room, in the moment, no, I didn't. It all happened so fast. It was very, very difficult. And you and I've spent a lot of time on behaviors, think of, very good at that, but it was extremely challenging. It was intimidating environment with the two VPs. It didn't come across as warm and welcoming. So it was very hard as me being comfortable in a people element to kind of have that cold front and try to compute and think very fast of what I'm hearing, what's going on, and give the right answers from my experience. So it didn't go very well, but that's okay because I don't think that would have been the right place for me at all.
No, that's a great, again, I think it was a blessing in disguise. But again, going
Mhm.
back to the topic of the fog of war, that is a challenge, the fog of war, though. If your relay race is scheduled for 1 hour and you're at the 59-minute mark, it's still not over, people. You have to, and I think what you're saying here is that even though you become very close, you still cannot be comfortable because
Mhm.
despite all the past experiences, everyone has been people oriented. Everyone's been big picture. From the Army, I've always learned it's the worst case scenario. What meteorite is going to hit me in the head as I walk to this job interview right now? What can I do not to be comfortable and to be ready on my toes? So again, I think it's a blessing in disguise. But I tell you, it's been a great learning lesson. And boy,
Mhm.
when you told me that the SVP turned him down, and he had a brand new VP and totally went against his VP. Woo, there's some issues there. So thank God you
Mhm.
didn't get in that environment.
No, I mean, it seems similar to the environment that I was trying to leave, so that would have been horrible, quite frankly.
Yeah. So you know what's funny? You told me something else about this, and I think this goes to your new position that that SVP who ultimately turned you down. When you got there, there was rosy red, picture of the organization. SVP had a different look. He's like, we've been damaged by our brand. In a sense, we're in the defense. That's what I was hearing. We're in the defense, and we're in the
Mhm.
defense. Anxiety, uh, you, you know, real focus on the details, the quality. You got to get everything right, perfect.
Mhm.
Bells started ringing in my head like, oh, that's not you. You need to be
Mm-mm.
in military terms in an offense. In your new organization, which is, I'm so excited for you. They're like, hey, we're moving forward. We're doing our best. We're competing hard. That's a growth company. And that's about
Mhm.
speed, doing it right. And that totally fits who you are. Totally.
Well, um, speaking about those two experiences, when we were talking, um, when I was talking to the SVP and he asked me a question about resource management, I had said an example of, well, I oversaw um, a department that had various functions. So if one function was slow one day and one function, had a lot of work, I would just steal someone and do it. He's like, oh, so you just steal it from another department. So I had to clarify, but he picked up on the word that I said steal, which you noticed that was like totally not in his wheelhouse. At the company that I'm going to, because we had this after action from that interview. So then I went for an interview at the company that ultimately accepted a position. And the CEO, when talking to me about the company and how they operate, he said, we have to be the best of the best in order to fight with fight against our bigger competitors. And I was like, oh, look at the word choice he's using, when kind of is a little bit more similar to steal. Like, I understand what he's saying. Are they actually fighting with competitors? No, but they're a small dog in a big race. So they got to be faster. They got to have a better product, all these things in order to be competitive with bigger guys that have more money, which is exciting. That wins even better than a normal win. So, going through where you've had failures or things not work out the way you want them, and something as little as we talked about a word that I used and how it was interpreted had me pick up immediately on that word fight that was used in my next interview by someone else.
Got almost like an aggressive spirit. We are moving forward. There are some people who like rules, and there are some people who like breaking rules. And I like people who break rules. I like to work for those. I don't know if I could work for someone who likes rules. I'd be like, why? You do something better.
Well, I think the other thing that taking away, the word fight, like you're saying, is aggressive. It's a move forward, throughout my 20 years in my organization. Obviously organizations change throughout time and things happen and stuff like that. And the way that it was at the end, my passion, my intensity, that was off-putting to the people that I worked with. Does that mean it's a bad thing and I shouldn't be passionate and I shouldn't be intense? No. But the environment had changed, and there was more people that felt more comfortable in a, I guess, less passionate, less intense environment. So it was conducive to them, but not to me. So it really was time for me to find something else. So going on an interview where the person that's hiring me is using the word fight made me feel extremely comfortable that, like, this might be a place that I could fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really important point. We all face our different fogs of war, whatever it is. But if you go through the fog, if you go from point A to B, you finally get to your final destination B, you got to make sure that B is the right destination. And that's the big thing. I think right now you have found a company that is exactly in your wheelhouse. They got this, in the military, in the Army, we're always taught there's really two extremes of operations. There's security, playing it safe, and there's speed. And sometimes there's risk involved. I like that, and I think you are too. And talking to your new organization, they have that kind of rhythm, that kind of speed element, and I think that's perfect. So the fact that you are able to identify exactly who you are, you really did. Again, a people-oriented leader who can drive rapid results. That's who you are. And when you have that clarity of who you are, I think that even though the fog of war exists, it doesn't harm you. Or it doesn't cause as much damage as if you didn't know who you are. Because if you have a million choices, you could have paralysis by analysis, right? But when you know who you are, you have a single lane. I may be in the wrong lane, but I'm on the right highway.
And with that, I mean, we analyze that a lot. I mean, I'm still going to be in a similar function, but it has a lot more responsibility, and it's a completely different industry. So I'm coming to the table with some tools, but I'm also going into an environment where I'm going to have to learn a lot, which we identified as where I like to be, so you're right. Knowing yourself and what you're looking for is extremely important, because if at the beginning of this whole adventure that we kind of went on together, if it was going to be like you were going to be in this industry and you're going to end up in this industry, I don't think either one of us would have ever believed it, because they're like polar opposites, really. There's some similarities, but not a whole lot. So I'm very excited, because it's like there's a lot to learn and a lot of new things, which we identified was one of the things that I was looking for.
So for the audience, let's clear. I know what you're saying about the polar opposites. You haven't gone from being a quality assurance, at a big company to being an ice cream salesman.
No.
You're still in a big general field, but you're doing work in a very different industry. But you were smart enough and nimble enough to say, they ask you, have you done X? Well, no, well, I haven't really done that, but back in my old job, we call that Y. So it really is the
Mm-hmm.
same. It may be
Mm-hmm.
different machinery, different metrics, but it's the same process. And that
Mm-hmm.
opened their eyes. And the one thing, do you remember how I told you the one thing that I have learned about organizations, especially when they create job descriptions? Now, some of the people listening here are probably going to cringe. Some people are probably going to nod their head. A lot of these organizations they know generally what they want, but they don't know exactly what they want. So when
Mm-hmm.
you read that job description on paper, to me, I see fluidity. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
if I went there, I'm like, that's what you think you want, but this is what I can bring.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just how I approach it. But that's the same thing. I feel like you had that kind of same approach too, that even though they wanted these certain credentials, I mean, I have those credentials, but I've done them. I've done them. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I had that general experience, and they accepted that, and I think they saw the value in that, because to me that shows them that you are fast paced and that you learn, and that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly the rhythm or the approach their company's taking.
I think too, they showed that they're willing to invest in people. Like you're coming in the door with something to add, but they're not, they're willing to take a risk and they're willing to teach you, which some of these other places were not. They wanted you to just have already done it. And that's not really like what I was at least looking for. I was looking for an opportunity to grow. So, and the other thing is too, even though they didn't really put it on their job description, to your point, one of the questions that I got was, have you ever had to um, take a standard and come up with a new test to fit specifically what you're testing? To me, that's a question about innovation and creativity, which you said before is in my wheelhouse. So even though that's not what was on the job description, that was a direct question in the interview, so they didn't say, how are you with innovation, which is probably what that SVP would have said, which is like, how do you come up with something? The questions were more specific so that you could answer them and like achieve the goal. So it was really kind of the whole environment that I thrive in. It was enough details that I could understand it and then I could execute it, but it wasn't so many details I would drown.
Yeah. So again, this goes to your behaviors. You are a
Yes,
low
very much.
conformist. You're a generalist. Doesn't mean you don't doesn't mean you can't do details. It means you're more comfortable focusing on
Mhm.
the essentials of seeing the common denominators among other things. And that's been a real benefit to you in these organizations. And if you're listening out there, some of you are like that. Some of you are not. You're very, very detail oriented, which is
Mhm.
fine. Just realize that what you say, what you focus on, is revealing. It really reveals
Mhm.
you, and it also reveals the people who are interviewing you. It tells
Mhm.
you what they're looking for. It really gives you an inkling of what their expectations of success are. So
Mhm.
despite what it may say on paper, we're all about growth. We're all about this. When you interview, you'll find out maybe something very different. So keep your eyes and ears open.
Yeah, so I think the major lesson is it's not just about finding a place that has a job with criteria that maybe you'd fit in. It's is the environment and the people you're going to be working with suitable to who you are as well. You have to really look for a place that has both.
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree with you. And that kind of self knowledge, that kind of self awareness, and I mean, not cheesy self awareness, I mean, like
Mm-mm.
real self awareness of your behaviors, of your motivators, of the kind of environments you thrive in. If you have that, you can seriously mitigate the effects of the fog of war. Because, Jodi, am I right? The fog of war is everywhere, it's every day, right?
Oh, I mean, even when we were pretty sure and talking that I was going to get this offer that I got, and I was trying to talk it through with you. If I get this offer, should I take it? I don't know. And you're like, you're saying that you want to, you're just, need some support. Like, yes, it's the right decision. So you never know what the right decision is. You never know. You got to kind of take your best educated guess. um but I think, at least for me, talking through it really helps. What are you saying? And after an experience like all of this, you said it the other day. What is your gut telling you? Trusting yourself, because you have a little self-doubt has been implanted. So really kind of trusting yourself and going for it. And like we talked about, what's the worst that can happen? You don't
Yeah.
like it, you find something else. So if you're in this position of you've been laid off, or if you're just not happy where you're working, what's the worst that can happen? Start taking control over your life, and where do you really want to be?
That's a great point. And I think when I first started working with you, was it 2.5 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
6 months or even a year into our discussions, I even mentioned to you, have you thought about something else? And you had been in the company nearly 2 decades, and your instincts were like, well, no, I can't do that. But look at
Mm-hmm.
you now, because you've had the experiences, you realize the opportunities out there. Life is short. Why not? I mean, two
Mm-hmm.
decades in corporate America, you've gone to something very different. But man, I'm extraordinarily excited for you, because fast pace, they need your talents. You're going to bring real value to them, and I think you're going to get that kind of that satisfaction. But you would not. I don't think you would appreciate them if you have not had these experiences. As even though job interviews could be, you know, terrorizing to some people, maybe boring to others, it's a hell of an experience. And I think
Mm-hmm.
every time you do it, if you have the proper reflection, you really, really get to see, you get to learn about yourself, a lot
Mm-hmm.
about others. And I think you start seeing to your, I would think you would say to yourself that, man, I really do bring value. And the fact these people are having conversations with me, that they want to continually do it, that shows me that I have options outside of what I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
So before we end this, uh, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being absolutely easy and 1 being completely horrifying, horrific, how would you rate your experience of getting a new position after being laid off?
Well, I think once you get the new position, you're, on a 5, you feel fantastic. But I think going through the process and the valleys were the part that were the toughest for me. It really is a roller coaster in this fog of war. Um, on average, I'd say it was probably a 2.5. So not that I wouldn't do it, you know, but dealing with the loss of control was very difficult for me. I think it would have been much easier if I wasn't laid off and we were looking for a job together, because I still had something to go to every day. You know, when you have a family and you have bills and everything, that's all in the back of your mind. So that adds some undue stress to the whole process. Um, yeah, so I'd say somewhere 2.5 to 3. It's not that I wouldn't do it again, but I think with everybody, you kind of want to be a little bit more in control and not be up against a wall. So that would have made it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed it. You know, thank you. So, thank you for letting me be a part of it, because I've grown with it too. And you had some great stories, which I'm sure one day will be case studies. So it was really good. So overall, I know this has been about, I wanted to do this podcast because to me, this is the example of the fog of war in real life. This is not academic.
Hmm.
Every day you're like, I'm in the fog of war. I'm like, yep, keep driving on, just keep driving.
And I absolutely hate living there. It is the worst. The
Yeah.
absolute worst. It's like you need to tether yourself to like a line and just put one hand over the other and keep walking forward, because you don't know if you're walking into a clearing or getting ready to walk over a cliff. You don't.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who likes to have control, it's very difficult. That's where I think the support element is extremely helpful, because sometimes you just need that little nudge, that little push, someone just in your corner supporting you, when you're facing no's is difficult,
So if you're out there listening and you're like Jodi, maybe you've been laid off or you need some support, check out our website, blackmarketleadership.com, where Jodi's been helping out. And boy, she has done a fantastic, fantastic job inside the site. We are very happy to enroll. In fact, our next podcast, we're going to do a Q&A talking about the site. But one of the things that we can do is support you in finding the right position, the right role, really finding what your value proposition is, and speak it in a normal way that people get it. And it takes time, but I tell you, once you get it, the fog of war will be its effect on you really will be diminished. It's still going to be there, people, but you got to really diminish it, and having that kind of self-awareness and confidence in your own self-value that what you can bring to people, I think it can really be a game changer for you in finding work. So
Totally
saying that, thank you for doing this, Jodi, and we'll talk to everyone later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile